Hello, and welcome to the Early American Brass Band Podcast. My name is Chris Chirano, joined always by Steven Canistraci.
Hello, everybody.
This is episode 17, where we'll be talking with Randy Cabell. Randy is well known for his contributions to the Early American Brass Band repertoire by creating editions for the Civil War music of the 19th Virginia Heavy Artillery Band, the Brass Band Journal, and Patriotic Songs and Airs of the Confederate States of America, where all of these publications include various program notes as well as important instrument substitutions that makes it more accessible to larger audiences. Usually the first E-flat cornet part and the first E-flat alto horn parts have B-flat cornet and French horn in F substitutions in them. So basically, these three full publications of music are now capable of being played in standard brass quintets. So super accessible, and we're really appreciative to Randy for all the work he's done with that.
Yeah, and he's also helped to finance some reproduction instruments for various early American brass bands around the country. And he has a recording with the Crestmark military band of some of the music from the 19th Virginia Heavy Artillery Band books. So yeah, like Chris said, I mean, he's done a lot to help make this music and this period of American music history accessible to a wider group of people, especially when you think about it in the context of college-age students who are playing in these chamber music groups with modern instruments, C, B-flat trumpets, to kind of not really change the music at all other than bring it down into a little more comfortable range that can help with some endurance issues that I know everybody runs into from time to time. So it was great to talk to him, and we really enjoyed the conversation. We are working with Randy on a plan to make some of his arrangements available more widely. We're not quite sure what form that's going to take yet, but in the meantime, if you are interested in any of the music that Randy has arranged, shoot us an email at eabb.podcast@gmail.com, and we can work out a way to get that to you. When we do have a plan, we will announce it on our social media pages. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So make sure you can just search the Early American Brass Band Podcast on whatever social media platform you're on, and we will pop right up. You definitely want to give us a follow over on those social media pages, because that's where you can keep up to date with us kind of on a day-to-day basis and get all of the information right from us first when we make decisions and whatnot. So like I said, when we come up with a concrete plan on how to do this, that's where it'll be announced. So make sure you follow us over there.
And please enjoy our interview with Randy Cabell. Thank you so much, Randy Cabell, for coming on to the podcast today. It's really a pleasure to have you on, so thank you very much.
Oh, well, listen, I really appreciate the invitation to do it, and looking forward to it.
Great. So, Randy, I know a lot of your music kind of centers around Virginia, and you lived in Virginia a long time. Were you born in Virginia?
Yeah, I was born. My mother we lived in Covington, Virginia, which is right on the border. In fact, I compare Covington with Hot Springs, Virginia, and White Sulphur Springs. And everybody knows of the Homestead and the Greenbrier. Unfortunately, Covington is not in the same league. We've got a paper mill.
There you go.
And at the time, they had destroyed all the fish in the James River down to Norfolk. They've subsequently cleaned it up. But yeah, I was born. And so she went to the University of Virginia to have me. This was in 1932.
Gotcha.
And I grew up in Virginia, went to Virginia's public schools. My father was activated with the National Guard in September 1940. So we moved to Virginia Beach. So I went to the Princess Anne County public schools, which no longer exists since there's no longer a Princess Anne County.
Oh, there you go.
And then later moved, he was made Army liaison officer after Pearl Harbor. And so we got quarters on the base at Norfolk. So we moved there, and I went to school in Norfolk. And then back to graduated in high school from Covington.
Gotcha. So a lot of Virginia in the early years.
Yeah.
Have you ever lived outside of Virginia?
Yeah, let's see. I went to Georgia Tech, so that was 4 years down there. Served in the Army for 2 years out in Fort Bliss, Texas. Lived in Philadelphia for a couple of years and worked for General Electric. And decided there was more to life than engineering. So Went back to graduate school, this at the University of Virginia, and got an MBA and got my wife, found my wife there.
There you go.
So then we moved to Atlanta after she graduated. She was working on her doctorate in math. So we lived in Atlanta for about 2 years and moved to Cape Canaveral, Florida for about 5 years. And then back to Virginia. We lived in Vienna, McLean, Great Falls, and Boyce.
So, Randy, how did you get involved with music in general? Has it always been a part of your life, or was it something that you found later on?
Well, it was almost all part of my life. I was 5 years old, and I sang in the junior church choir, the Episcopal Church in Covington. I remember making wooden crosses and marching through our basement and singing hymns, "Onward, Christian Souls." So my parents, neither one of whom were musical, recognized the talent and took me to meet the director of the city Covington Firemen's Band. He also was the director of the C&O Employees Band. This was back in the 30s when every organization had a band, every town had a band. And he looked at my little fingers and said that the only instrument that would be suitable would be a soprano saxophone. And so my parents found a secondhand curved soprano, which I played off and on for the next, I guess it was about 10 years. And got to high school, and it looked like I was smoking a pipe. It was, I was so tall and it was so small. I was embarrassed to appear with it. And the band director, fortunately, found an alto for me.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then I also knew that kind of when you started getting involved with brass bands and stuff, I knew you as a tuba player. So when did the tuba become a part of your arsenal of instruments?
Well, I went to at Georgia Tech. I played in several bands. One was a Dixieland band, and we didn't have a tuba. But at the time, the most popular Dixieland band in the country was called the Firehouse 5+2. Apparently, they were a group of Walt Disney people who started playing. And of course, they had a tuba and a banjo. And I thought, you can't have a Dixieland band without a tuba and a banjo. So when we got down to Florida, I was doing something at the music store, I guess picking up music. I saw this old tuba on the shelf. I said, "What is that?" And he said, "It's an old E-flat tuba." I said, "You will sell it?" "Yeah." He said, "Yeah." So I said, "Well, how much?" He said, "How about $25?" And so that was it. I brought it home and started blowing on it and played it. Never did really learn to read the bass clef. As you probably know, a secret with the E-flat horn is if you're reading a bass clef, printate it in the treble clef and add 3 sharps and you just go on. That's what I did.
Yeah, that's how I read saxophone music, also just going the other way to bass clef.
Exactly. Oh, really?
Yeah. Reading
alto, I thought that was my secret.
No. Maybe it was originally, but the secret's out now. So learning the tuba and getting involved with music was all really interesting. In terms of the Civil War, would you consider yourself kind of always to be maybe a Civil War buff, or did you only really get interested in the Civil War as it related to the brass music that you kind of learned about later? How did that come about?
Well, it really came from two directions. Mainly the music, but my great-grandfather was a captain in the Confederate cavalry. And I think that's where I got my music from. We've got some letters written about him after he died. He was mortally wounded in the last cavalry charge at Amelia Courthouse, covering Lee's retreat. And so I've always been interested in Hugh McGuire, just from the viewpoint of him being in the Civil War. As far as the brass band, I guess I got interested in it after I'd retired from IBM. We were living in Boyce, Virginia, which is right around the corner from Winchester. So I got involved with the university there, Shenandoah University, and they had a Civil War Institute. And I got to thinking with the Civil War Institute, and they also had a very fine music program. So I said, I don't want to get involved with the Civil War. And that's when I found Robb Stewart out on the West Coast, who made reproductions. And one thing led to another, and it just sort of fell together.
There you go. So you were able to help Shenandoah University create their brass band. Do you remember what they called that group?
No, it was relatively unsatisfactory. The whole arrangement was because I had no official standing with them, and the band at Shenandoah really didn't want to have anything to do with these funny looking instruments. They were all over the shoulder instruments, and so consequently, it was in the Civil War Institute, and eventually, I think what they did is they gave the horns away to a local Civil War band group. I think that's all I'm fishing.
Gotcha. I know that you helped, as you just mentioned, the Shenandoah group. I know that there was a number of other groups that you kind of took under your wing and kind of helped to help out with acquiring instruments. Can you maybe talk about some of those other projects that you were involved with?
Yeah, let's see. I guess
acquisition.
Back to the emphasis on Virginia. The Stonewall Brigade Band in Stanton, as you know, has all of its original instruments, over-the-shoulder instruments, but they're fragile. So what I did is I worked with them to get the reproduction instruments from Robb Stewart. And then, for some reason, let's see. I guess I got interested in VMI at the time. The ranking cadet who was killed at Newmarket was a Cabell, a very distant relative from Richmond. So I've always looked to VMI. Said I never could survive at VMI, but I admire anybody who does.
Yeah.
And so I worked with Colonel Brody at VMI and got them the musical instruments, and they used them. Let's see. Worked just slightly with the Moravian Music Foundation. I think maybe was involved in getting them one reproduction horn.
Gotcha.
So that's about the only one outside of Virginia only project I've had outside of Virginia.
Mm-hmm. So how were all of these connections made? Were these instances where you knew that they were in need of help from an instrument acquisition standpoint, or did you reach out to them just wanting to help? Like how did you get involved with essentially four different?
It was more arrogance than anything else. Like Professor Harold Hill, you need a boys band. So I tried to, and as you well know from the short time that we've known one another, I have great ideas about how other people should do things. So that was basically it. I went and made suggestions to them, and in most cases they were taken up to one degree or another.
I'd like to make the point that you've also helped the George Mason University Early American Brass Band as well. You helped give us an E-flat tuba and an E-flat alto horn that we still use. So thank you for helping us as well.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, you all are just you all are the best of the best because you're doing something with the music, and that has always been my frustration. Is that in most of those other instances, quite frankly, it was a kind of flame of new things, and then it just sort of dropped by the wayside. And I think you've sensed that when you've looked and talked to some of the places about, well, would you share your instruments? Oh, no, we might use them sometime.
Yeah. There's some people that still kind of want to hang on to them. There's some people that don't know where they are anymore. There's some, like you said, there's kind of this ebb and flow of interest almost in the style of music. And you're right. On the Early American Brass Band podcast website, we have a resource that lists a number of currently active Civil War Early American brass bands, as well as a list of bands that have gone inactive. And seeing how many bands have existed and ceased to exist kind of was kind of like an indicator to Stephen and I and the Green Machine at George Mason University of needing to figure out a way to make sure that this will continue and that it's not just like a project for a year or two type of thing.
I've played in a number of brass groups over the years, and have concluded that you've got to have something that re-energizes that group periodically. You can't just do what you've done for, at least my experience has been, you can't do what you've done for the last 10 years because people don't continue the interest in it.
Yeah, and I think kind of where we're coming at it from a little bit more perhaps an educational standpoint. I mean, we're both still doctoral students, and being euphonium players, we're apt to dive more into the band history than maybe like the orchestral history
Sure.
that we get a lot of times through a university. So, and this era of history in the United States is rich with like the beginnings of band history. And I mean, you can trace how, these brass bands that were active before, during, and after the Civil War have then evolved into like what we see modern day right down the street with, Pershing's Own and the Marine Band and all those military bands. So it's more of and that I think really helps us to energize students at Mason to kind of get involved with this type of music, and it really helps us keep the interest going from a research perspective too.
Good for you. Well, hang in there.
Forward.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. So hang in there with it.
I think our perspective as euphonium players, I think, is a main aspect for it too. Because I know that when I wanted to start the group at Mason, one of the initial driving forces was, well, I'm a euphonium player. We've got like essentially no gigs, so I was looking to create a band that would give myself more gigs. So. Yeah, and this time period is the invention of our instrument, so we're basically able to go back to the beginning.
Yeah. I get back to the gigs. I guess the only guaranteed gig for a euphonium player is a tuba Christmas.
Yeah, there you go.
As the euphoniums as the lead.
Yeah, and that's a gig you pay to do.
Oh, really?
Well, sometimes. I mean, you pay like a $10 registration fee just to, offset the cost of printing the books and all.
I didn't realize.
But the one at the Kennedy Center in DC is free. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's for a good cause, the Tuba Christmas thing. One last thing maybe about the instruments. I was wondering, you keep mentioning Robb Stewart's name, and I was wondering maybe how you got linked up with him. Was it just kind of his reputation for his craftsmanship that led you to him for the reproduction instruments?
Boy, that is, I'm not really sure how I got linked up with him. No, but it's all foggy. It would probably be in the early to mid 1990s. And somebody just mentioned Robb Stewart on West Coast, and one thing led to another. Yeah. It's actually I talked to him later. I think he said, and this is 20 years ago, so I don't know whether it's changed. But he said he really is a placer of secondhand instruments, rather than a designer, rather than building, which is just well, apparently was a sideline at the time. But he's really known for his quality reproductions.
We mentioned how we were able to get the Mason band was fortunate to receive some instruments from you as well. Did you ever, by any chance, own any period Civil War era instruments by any chance?
No, I don't think I ever did. The earliest I came, I had, I think that alto horn I gave you all has an 1892 or 1893 date on it. Mm-hmm. The tuba, I think, has maybe a 1905.
That's how.
And there was a Helican that I gave to the Richmond City Band. I forget. I have a feeling. I don't know whether it was American or not, but it went back to 1870. Mm-hmm. That's about the oldest one I ever had.
Gotcha. Did you ever have the opportunity to play firsthand in one of these types of early American brass bands?
No, not well. I did with the Stanton group.
Okay.
Sat in with them a couple of times down there, and we played. But that's all.
So your like hands-on involvement seems to have been your instrument acquisition, helping through all these different organizations, but then kind of a major, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like a major way that you were involved in this community and with this music was through various arranging projects that you were involved in.
That's true. That certainly is true of the 19th Virginia, arranging it and providing some alternate instruments. I don't know, your B-flat cornets, for example, as alternate to the E-flats. Mm-hmm. And there was another one. It wasn't the 19th century brass bands, but I'm not sure I mentioned it to you. I did a CD of Jamestown music because that's about as Virginia as you can get.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And it was 1807, 1907, and a couple of selections for 2007. on the CD, and Lehigh University recorded it. So,
wow.
When do you know what year they recorded that?
Probably it was 2006 because we were getting ready for 2007, and Lord, I forget the name of the people up there, but we went up a couple of times to listen to them, and it was really quite good. I'll send you a CD because it's interesting.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
I asked when because my oldest brother Dan graduated from Lehigh University, but that recording project took place before he would have entered school.
Oh there. Yeah, they had David Diggs. He was the director of the wind ensemble, and they had a pretty good flow of money to produce CDs each year. So it just happened that they didn't have a project for 2006, 2007. So he went ahead and produced that, and it was very good.
Neat.
Gotcha. So I have that as a part of your writings, your arrangements that you do. You kind of put it underneath this umbrella of the digital heritage of Virginia.
And the digital heritage of Virginia. Yes, you're right. You're right.
Super official. And kind of some of the work that you've done includes the Civil War music of the 19th Virginia Heavy Artillery Band, the Brass Band Journal for the Rest of Us, patriotic songs and airs of the Confederate States of America. So you have a lot of music kind of under this umbrella. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what made you select certain projects that you did? Because I will say that for all of this work that you do, it includes copious liner notes, program notes. It has a lot of really interesting information included. It has substitute parts. You're basically publishing a book every time you do one of these publications. So a lot of what I'm assuming, many long hours has gone into each of these projects. So can you talk about kind of what made you select what you did for these projects?
Well, as I said, it starts primarily, does it have something to do with Virginia? Obviously, the 19th Virginia band did because they were from Virginia. And the Jamestown was a great example because the exposition was located in Norfolk, Newport News, Virginia. So the guiding force, I guess, was it had to have something to do with Virginia. The second thing was anybody else doing anything? And generally the answer was no. So that's why I embarked upon it, got software, and dug in. And I guess it was pretty much, at one time I found one person who had heard of the 19th Virginia band, but most of the time it was just sort of by myself.
Gotcha. Can you maybe give a little bit of background or some context to the 19th Virginia band? I know that name's kind of been mentioned a few times in the interview so far, and your work with them is awesome and very vast. So can you maybe talk about them a little bit and maybe why the writing that you did was kind of significant to preserve that?
Okay. First, it's the band books of the 19th Virginia, which were in the Museum of the Confederacy. Now it's called the Museum of the American Civil War. But they are the only Virginia Confederate band books to survive. So that in itself says that there's something, You look at Union band books, you've got the Port Royal band book, you've got everybody, the Brass Band Journal, such things as that. Mm-hmm. There are bits and pieces of other band books. I shouldn't say bits and pieces. There are actually some pretty good collections, as I understand. 26 North Carolina probably has done the best. Mm-hmm. But I think the 8th Georgia has a lot of their original music. Mm-hmm. So basically, we had the band books, the only band books that Virginia Confederate music that survived. So that in itself, to me, waved a big flag and said, hey, this looks like something we should do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So that's how I got started on that. Yeah. Later on with the Jamestown music, it's much the same thing. Virginia music, people had done things, but nobody had put together a CD with the 3 years of music, 1807, 1907, which was very rich. My goodness, there was marches written every other day, I think, in 1907.
Yeah.
And then 2007 is basically represented by my march, which is I call the Trumpeter of Jamestown. And let's see, I guess the other big thing was there was a movie called, I forget what it was called. It was a terrible, terrible movie. It made who's the guy who was a hero in my book was the hero of Jamestown? Made him look like a real dolt. But the music for the movie was done by the guy who had done the music for the Titanic.
James
so David
Warner.
Diggs made arrangements with him to produce a band, and that's recorded on the James. Produce a band arrangement of it.
That's awesome. Really cool. Do you know if the 19th Virginia? Do you know any history about the band itself during the
Well, it's a real mystery. There are muster records in the Civil War Museum, American Civil War Museum, and there's records in I guess that's the main place. And it's interesting that there's a muster, only 2 musters of a dozen or maybe 2 dozen have the band. And unlike the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band and unlike the Stonewall Brigade Band, the band of the 19th Virginia was really made up of men from a company. Mostly it was Company A, and the band was just an other assignment. That was pretty unique from what I've been able to find.
To the best of your knowledge, was that band just formed out of musicians that were enlisted in that company, or was it a town band prior to the war?
We don't really know. In fact, the music itself, the band book of the 19th Virginia itself is a mystery because it has no Confederate patriotic tunes in it. Actually has no Union patriotic tunes in it. Has that subtitle Vauxhall Band, and it implies to me that the band book, we call it the band book of the 19th Virginia or the Smithfield Brass Band, probably the band book was used at some outside gig. I think there was a Vauxhall Gardens on an island in Richmond. It's just a pleasure garden. But we don't know when the era was. There was some hints. There was a march in there called Bright Hope's Quickstep. And we know that there was a railroad charted about 10 years after the Civil War called the Bright Hopes Railroad. So, goodness, one thing is maybe the book didn't come along until 10 years later. But nobody has ever been able to, as far as I know, to pin any further identification down on that thing. All of the men were from, let's see if I'm right on that. I think that's a correct statement. All of the men were from Isle of Wight County or Smithfield. And I think most of them were from Company A.
Gotcha.
Or Battery A. It was an artillery unit, so it would be a Battery A.
Gotcha. So you think that the 19th Virginia Band was nicknamed Smithfield while they were already in service, or is it possible that there was a Smithfield brass band prior to the war and then they enlisted and became the 19th Virginia?
There's a possibility. There is so much music at the Museum of the Confederacy, now Museum of the American Civil War, so much music of E-flat alto horn parts for the band in Smithfield. I think maybe there are 100 parts, nothing else. No tenor horn parts, no leads, no nothing. So I'm inclined to think that what they've got at the American Museum of the Civil War is a spectrum of time that the band was in existence. I suspect that there was already a band because one of the early players was named Kofer, and about a month later, his cousin or brother joined the group. So somebody, in other words, they already knew how to play. And there's this mysterious guy called Professor Umbrecht, who is listed in one of the museums as contributing to the band. Can't ever find anything about him. I don't know who he is, when he was, or anything. I suspect he was probably maybe in charge of music at one of the theaters or something like that. But there's just really, we know nothing whatsoever about the 19th Virginia.
Gotcha. Can you maybe talk about some of the considerations that you took when trying to select the, from those hundreds of pieces that you're saying that you saw the alto horn parts from, how you narrowed it down to include the ones that you did in your 19th collection?
Yes, that's a very simple answer. I took the band book itself. Okay. If it wasn't in the band book, I didn't put it in place.
Gotcha.
Because the band book had some of the items in the band book were really in bad shape. But by and large, with the exception of the tuba part, which was missing, parts were all there. And so that was very simple for me to put it into software, musical software. And it wasn't really necessary to decide, should I do this or should I do that? I just took the 18 selections and produced the band book.
Gotcha. So there was a band book for every instrument for the band except for tuba, but then there were additional parts of alto horn parts for other pieces that didn't have other parts along with them?
Yes, that's right. I don't know how the collection was organized in the museum, but that's a good summary of it, is that there were the band books and then there was individual music, both identified as being part of the Smithfield Brass Band. And I think, depending on, I think it would be a good master's, maybe even a doctoral project for your group up there to look into producing band book number 2 or something, or going through and knowing what these other selections were, like Hail Columbia. There was some patriotic music in there, a lot of Dixies apparently. But anyway, producing a band book, and with the alto part, you can do a pretty good job of assuming who was doing what with the other parts there. So it might be a great opportunity for somebody up there in George Mason to produce a band book number 2 or band book number 3.
Gotcha. I know one of our previous guests, Dr. Michael O'Connor, he's a leader of the Coates Brass Band and Newberry's Victorian Cornet Band, 2 early American brass bands, and he's going through a major project right now of trying to catalog and identify every piece of early American brass band repertoire that existed from 1835 to, I think he's doing it to like the late 1870s or something like that. So I made sure to provide him with the list of all the songs that are a part of this collection and stuff. And who knows, maybe he's done some of that work and will be able to enlighten us on some of the music.
That would be good, yeah. The Brass Band Journal was interesting. I found threads of that out in Utah, that it was used apparently by some of the Utah bands back in the 19th century. I'm sure that'll come out in his study.
Yeah, there are so many like community bands and that it's hard to trace down the history, from this time. Because as you were saying, earlier, every town, every company, it seemed like every firehouse, had a band during this time. And then, so trying to track down information about them can be kind of tricky. And then obviously if it was a town band that then, enlisted in the military during the Civil War, especially like you're saying was the case with the 19th Virginia Band, where the band duties seemed to be kind of secondary. Maybe they were soldiers first and musicians, as a secondary duty. That would make sense then why a lot of those parts are missing. If those soldiers were, out in the field of battle, fighting, and then, dropped a book along the way somewhere, who knows?
And I think it's even more complex with the 19th Virginia, because they were stationed within probably a couple hours ride of their homes around Petersburg. Yeah. So they could leave the things at home, I guess.
Right.
Here's a list that I came up with of members, and I'll just read one of them as an example. Mosby, Charles E., drummer, Company B, it became. And then the reference. Incidentally, there's a book, I don't know whether you've seen it, called The 10th and 19th Virginia Heavy Artillery Regiments.
Yeah.
it's a series of books on regiments. But anyway, Mosby enlisted on November the 27th, 1862. He shows in the August 31st, 1864, and December 31st, 1864, as a member of the battalion band. Those two musters, the August 31st and the December 31st, are the only two in the entire span of the Civil War where the band is broken out. And I also have a note here. He does not show in the list of members from the Museum of the Confederacy. So I guess what I did, I must have gotten his information, enlisting information from that series of books called The 10th and the 19th.
Gotcha.
Heavy artillery, yeah. And in general, let's see if it ain't more that. Here's one poor guy died in August of 1864. But no, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And when you were creating this collection for the heavy artillery band, you mentioned how you had to create the tuba part. Were there any other additions or changes or corrections that you had to make while you were creating the band book, recreating the band book?
There were some where the band books were torn, or there were some problems. Probably not more than 2 or 3%. So in other words, I didn't have to do very much. The bass drum was a very bad one, though, because I had trouble telling what the difference between the beats and the rest. So, and it was key in doing the tuba part, the bass part, because if the bass drum hit, I figured, well, the tuba is probably being tuba hit.
Probably.
Now, later on, when it was recorded, Glenn Fifield added a B-flat cornet part. He became convinced that there was also a B-flat cornet part missing. And if you look at Civil War brass bands like the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band, indeed, there's usually always at least one B-flat cornet. So he did add basically a harmony part. And let's see, I think he also cleaned up the two tenor horns and alto horn part, because they were basically playing the pause, and they were duplicating. One of them would duplicate the other. So his theory was that probably the person who was producing the books did not have a score that he worked from. He just went ahead and did each book. But those are the only times, and I couldn't tell you the difference of what the bands would sound like if we didn't have that B flat. The recordings of the band that you've got have the B flat cornet part in it, and the pause have been cleaned up.
Yeah, I'm assuming there were probably some note corrections that you had to make as well, right? Or was it pretty accurate in terms?
It was pretty accurate. In fact, it was all handwritten. And in general, it was pretty clear what the note was. And there were some exceptions. Shorthand, you've probably done this. In fact, when I was doing arranging, it would be typically, I would use a short dash, which was at about 45 degrees, and that was a quarter note with a stem on it. There was some of that. But by and large, it was really pretty easy to figure out what the notes were.
That's good. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how the recording project came to be and how you became involved with helping to provide the music for the recording project?
Yeah, the project, I looked around after I published the books. I looked around for some band in Virginia who would be interested in making a CD. It just looked like to me it cried out for a CD. And I could not find any. And we had a daughter who at the time lived in Logan, Utah, where her husband was doing postdoc in microbiology at Utah State. And she sent me a clipping, not a huge article out of the paper about this 19th century brass band that was plays out of there. So I said, look at that. So I got in touch with Glenn Fifield, who directed the band, and told him what I had, and one thing led to another, and he decided that he would make a CD. So it was all done out there. Along the way, he concluded that there was a B flat cornet part missing, and he cleaned up the pause, and they embarked upon recording. And they found, as well as I remember the story was, they found that the cornet parts were so taxing that the best way to get them recorded was to record the rest of the band and then put the cornets in a room by themselves, listening to the band with headphones and playing.
Interesting.
That seemed to work fine.
Gotcha.
The only other time I got involved was at the very end of the project. He sent me the final tracks, and in the 5 songs, for Lorena, we had 5 songs where we had taken. I had suggested that we have singing soldiers, singing along with the brass band, and so 4 of them came out of my book about the museum, the Patriotic Tunes and Airs of the Confederate States of America. And the Dixie and Bonnie Blue Flag were particularly bad because it would go, "We are a band of the brothers and two native to the hoop." I said, what in the world is that? Well, it turned out to be the quartet that was singing got so enthralled with the music, they bumped against the microphone as they were recording. and the recording, it wasn't that obvious, it's just told you. But anyway, it produced basically a single cycle sine wave when they hit the microphone. So my involvement with the recording project was to use my SoundForge software and go through and take out the thumps.
There you go.
But it was an interesting application of modern technology to fixing up those 19th century songs.
Yeah, it's a great album. I was recently trying to find out, and you and I were in touch about this, so this is more to catch up the audience, the people listening. But
sure.
I was trying to find if the Crestmark Military Brass Band was still an active group, so I went through all the personnel on the CD, and I was trying to find people that were involved with it.
Yeah.
And I eventually got in touch with Hal Briggs, who was one of the cornet players on that album, and he informed me that the Crestmark Military Brass Band is now going by the name of the 7th Infantry Regimental Brass Band. So so people will see that kind of listed that way on our website in the active band category.
I bet that's typical of what you're finding with brass bands.
Yeah, for sure.
They change their spots. I think there's some brass band up in Baltimore playing as a 26th North Carolina.
Yeah, that's Yari Villanueva's group. He has the Federal City Brass Band.
Federal, yeah.
And then they have a Confederate impression, which is the 26th North Carolina. Yeah, for sure. And then it's a great album. The Dear Mother, I've Come Home to Die, Quickstep.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting that they would.
They're playing on modern instruments, but it is very good, very clean, and music that's not recorded anywhere else. So it's great to hear it. Yeah. And we were most fortunate to get Colonel Gibson from EMI to narrate. He's the one who actually holds the whole CD together. Something that I really loved about the 19th collection, the 19th Virginia collection, and you made, and everything from your repertoire that you've written, is how accessible you make all the music. I know it's a mission of Stephen and I through the podcast, and then also our own band, that we're trying to increase people's awareness of this music and kind of break down some of the barriers that some people might feel that there are in order to get involved with this music. And something that we love with yours is that you include a bunch of substitute parts in the music. I noticed that was in the 19th Virginia collection, but then even more so, your collection titled "The Brass Band's Your Own for the Rest of Us," which I think which is an awesome collection that I think can become people's gateway into playing this type of music, especially if they don't have E-flat cornets or E-flat alto horns.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the changes you made and why that particular project was on your list of things to get done?
Yes, the Brass Band Journal, as I mentioned earlier, I found traces of that almost everywhere I looked. Mm-hmm. It was published, I forget who was the company, it was a New York company, and I think it was as early as 1850 that they first started publishing those things.
That's the Firth Pond and Company.
Yeah, Firth, and I think you're right. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking at that. I heard some band somewhere play the music, and it was simply terrible because basically it was B flat. It was ordinary mortals with B flat cornets trying to play the E flat parts, or trying to play that, and consequently that's when I dropped the pitch about half an octave, and gave it the title of Brass Band Journal for the Rest of Us, because although the structure of the arrangements was the same, and by and large, the instrumentation was the same. Two cornets, alto horn. I think there were 2 tenor horns, but I'm not sure, and a tuba. Might have been just a quintet. Mm-hmm. And I found later I sent them to a friend of mine down in the Norfolk area, and his brother played with the Fort, I forget what the name of the fort. At the time, it was a Fort Monroe band. I guess it was a Tradoc band. And they really liked those arrangements with the reduced pitch. In other words, there's always a danger when you're talking with good musicians, is they want to play those things originally where they were. But he spoke so highly of that. He said, these things are really great because we can play them and we don't get worn out. Mm. So that's basically how that came about.
Yeah, trying to save some of the trumpet player's face if they're not on that if they're not on the E flat cornet, those things really scream on a B flat trumpet. So.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, well, as one of the things I did was to come up with a measure of how difficult they were, like counting the number of notes in a given piece above the key, above the staff. Mm-hmm. To me, I can play. I have trouble getting anything above E on the staff. Start talking about above the staff, and then start talking about replicating E flat cornet parts. You never come down below the staff.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and that's something that when you're talking about trying to bring this music into like present day practice. Trumpet players barely play cornets anymore, let alone an E flat cornet. Your modern, let's say university level trumpet player is probably going to have a B flat trumpet and a C trumpet. So if you're trying to play these E flat cornet parts on B flat and C trumpets, you're lucky to get through a tune and a half before you're just absolutely shot.
You're right.
So if there's really any hope of this music, bringing it forward and using it in that educational setting, exactly what you did with the For the Rest of Us kind of subtitle on Brass Band Journal. It's at some point it's got to be necessary to make it accessible, which is great that it exists. It's great that you did that, and the fact that you tried to keep it, other than dropping the range, keep it largely as it was. To preserve some of that historical aspect too is great. I don't think there's another way that you're going to be able to play this music today with some of the instrumentation challenges than to do what you did. So
let me ask you all a question. I've never gotten a good answer to this. Why is it that the E flat, why is it that those things were pitched so high that we needed the E flat cornets? I've got a theory, but I wanted to know if you've ever looked into that.
That with the sax horn family, Adolph Sax really loved that alternating E flat, B flat, E flat, E flat pitching. And since those horns were floating around, maybe that's why. But outside of that, that's just off the top of my head, something that I'm pulling out of my rear end there. That's true or not.
Well, my theory is it all goes back to the military band of the 18th century, which was basically either 2 clarinets or 2 oboes, playing the first and the harmony, 2 French horns, basically, and a bass line. Mm-hmm. And fifes, and I've get arguments on this. The typical fife from, well, let's see, your fiance, I believe, plays fife, doesn't she, Chris?
Yeah, I have like 3 of them laying in this room right now.
Ask her what key it's in. The answer, I think, is going to be A flat.
Okay.
And so what they do is there's no little finger key on the fife. So basically they can't go below what I would call a D. Mm-hmm. But basically the fife, it plays in the key of B flat. And so my theory is that Adolph Sax and the people who came along were working with military bands, and that basically the military band of the time was playing most of the things in B flat or E flat. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's my theory. Yeah. Otherwise, I can't imagine why in the world we would put those things up so high.
Right. Yeah. Just to hurt our ears,
to torture people.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Great. Yeah. It kind of goes along with the discussion, Stephen, that you and I were having with Jonathan Hodgetts from Wessex last week in the episode. We were, Randy, talking about how. Kind of similar to the talk we were having today with Robb Stewart, how reproduction brass instruments at some point is probably going to need to become the standard if we're looking to expand and grow this ensemble type to any like great extent, because there's only so many period instruments,
right,
that exist, and that number is going to continue to get smaller as people, put them in museums or keep them in their collection.
Yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm. So period instruments reproduction instruments, I think, is the way forward for large scale incorporation for people to get involved, especially at university levels and stuff. And then similarly, making the music that accessible. If people aren't going to get reproduction instruments in E flat, B flat, E flat, B flat, kind of going down, they're going to need a way to play this music on the instruments that they have.
Yeah.
And that's going to be B flat trumpets and French horns and
French horns. Yep.
Yeah. So, I think it's kind of the other side of the coin, but of the same discussion of how to make this music more accessible so that people can learn from it and become exposed to it.
Yeah. Good for you. You. In your work, have you touched any on British brass bands and the difference between American brass bands and British?
Yeah, we've discussed how they both developed at the same time, and how the traditions kind of split a little bit, but yeah, they kind of all came from the same place and then kind of did their own things once they were.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah. The biggest difference that I'm aware of is everything except the second trombone part is in the treble clef in the British brass bands.
Yeah, I think the timpani part is in bass clef as well.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think it's the bass trombone and the timpani part are in bass clef, but then everything else. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, everything else is in treble clef, and you largely have that alternating E flat, B flat. So that people can hop around parts without.
That's what I understand is the reason behind the thing is you had like maybe some coal company or miners or something. They had a band and somebody didn't show up, but they had his instruments. So the fingering is exactly the same.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of it's like a whole user friendly musical interface. You can just hop around unless you play the trombone. Then you learn some fingerings, but
that's right. There's probably a story behind that one too.
Yeah. If the bass trombone player doesn't show up, then you're just SOL.
But I feel like in a lot of the older stuff, I mean, now the British brass band tradition has gotten crazy. I mean, they've always had contests and stuff, but those test pieces that they use for those contests are
really
wildly difficult. But I feel like maybe some of the original, like the older rep, that bass trombone part's probably doubled somewhere like in the E flat tuba. To still have it be represented. But yeah, I play in a British brass band down here. Well, up here, I guess. It's newly formed brass band in Northern Virginia, and we were gonna be at the NABA competition that was supposed to happen in April, and we were working on some test pieces for our division, and they're challenging pieces. I mean,
the
euphonium parts are hard, and then you look across the rectangle there, how you're set up at the cornet players, and they're just buried in the stands and just going. It's fun. It's a lot of fun, though.
Oh, that is great. Well, I didn't realize that there was English brass bands here.
Yeah. There's one, in the Fairfax area. So
that's kind of the interesting thing too, is that we had our own brass band tradition, and then that evolved, into the community band, concert band tradition that we have in the United States, and the American brass band essentially died off. But at the same time, in Europe, the brass band that formed at the same time continued and is in some ways kind of their dominant, or one of their dominant ensemble types in the UK. And now it's interesting because the British, American brass band and British brass band kind of going along in time. Then the American brass band goes away, the British brass band keeps on going, and now the British brass band ensemble is now coming back to the United States, and there's a huge British brass band movement happening in the United States with NABA, the North American Brass Band Association that Stephen just mentioned. But it's kind of interesting how people are kind of discovering brass band music for the first time in the United States, but through the British brass band tradition. And it's like, we had our own tradition. We had we had it too. It just
it's funny. I've never thought about it that way, Chris, but that is hilarious. Now that you kind of lay it out that way.
It's like, we had it. It was ours too. It's just we have the concert bands. Alrighty, well, that about wraps it up. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. It's awesome getting the chat with you. I'm excited that people are going to be able to hear your story and learn more about all the hard work that you've done for preserving and spreading early American brass band music. We know it's going to.
Oh, thank you.
We know it's going to help a lot of people, so we really appreciate you doing that work and taking the time to speak with Stephen and I today.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
of course. Thank you again so much, Randy Cabell, for coming onto the podcast to speak with Stephen and I. As I mentioned, Randy was one of the first people that I was in touch with in the early American brass band community, and he helped start my collection of music by sharing with me much of the music that he talked about in this episode. So, yeah, very grateful for him taking the time to speak with us, and we're very excited to have the honor and opportunity to share that music with you. So if you're interested in playing or even just looking and studying any of the music that Randy talked about in this episode, be sure to send us an email at eabb.podcast.com. We'd be happy to share it with you. At some point, as Stephen mentioned at the top of the episode, there'll be some point in the future some other way that we'll make that music available. But as of this recording, just shoot us an email. We'll be happy to send it to you.
Our featured album for this episode is the one we mentioned during the episode. It's the Crestmark Military Band album titled Dear Mother, I've Come Home to Die Quickstep. You can find more information about that album on the show notes page for this episode. That's at our website. That's eabbpodcast.com. Click on show notes. And we'll have links there for you to buy the album and some information about it. It's also on the discography page under the resources tab, along with a giant list of other albums that you might be interested in. So go check out the Crestmark Military Band Dear Mother, I've Come Home to Die Quickstep album. And thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.